You will never be accused of plagiarism if you follow these simple citation rules. And these rules fall into two different categories: when not to cite and when to cite. First of all, if you ever write about something that is considered accepted or general knowledge, then you don't need to cite somebody. For example, if you're talking about the world being round, then you don't need to cite Aristotle for that. Everybody will know that you did not come up with that piece of information yourself, because that's what we do when we're citing, right? We're actually looking to see who the original person is that discovered something or generated some data. We don't want to say that we're stealing it, we want to give them credit. But when it's something that's become accepted or general knowledge, we don't need to do that. It's considered so well known that we don't need to identify where we got that from. The other main time that you won't need to cite is when something is your own work. And that comes in a few different categories. The first is when we have our own data, and that's really common. For example, in the sciences, when you're writing a scientific report, you will generate your own data through a study. When you're writing a results section, you will be describing your own data, so you don't need to cite somebody. That work has come completely from you. The same goes for whenever you're writing about your own opinions or experiences. For example, in a narrative essay, you don't need to cite somebody else because it was you that experienced those things and it's you that you're writing about, that you're telling the story of. The other time that you won't need to cite is when you have your own image, so a photo or a graph, in your assessments. But most of the time we do need to cite. And that falls into four main categories. The first is when we take somebody else's data and we use that in our own work. And that's especially common in the STEM or medical sciences, where we take somebody's data from a journal article and we use it in our own work, in our own study, perhaps for a literature review or a scientific report. And there's a few different times that we'll actually need to cite the same person. For example, in our text, when we write about the fact we got that data from somewhere. Or if we make a graph, then we'll need to cite that study again in the figure caption. And then if we have that data displayed in a table, then we'll also need to cite that same study in the table caption. So you'll have that same citation appear multiple times throughout your report when you've taken somebody else's data for your own work. The second time that we'll need to cite someone, and this is probably the most common one, is where we paraphrase or summarize somebody else's words. So we're essentially taking their words and rewriting it in our own words to highlight the key piece of information or point of view. Then we definitely need to cite where we got that concept from. The third time we need to cite is when we use a direct quote. And the difference is to the previous one where we paraphrased or summarized. When we do a direct quote, we're taking the exact words from somebody else's work, putting them in our own. So we haven't changed the words at all. In that instance, we have to remember to use quotation marks as well as the citation. And a key point here is a lot of reference styles require the page number. And then we also definitely need to cite when we use somebody else's method. And this is more common than what you think. Even if we change it a little bit, so if we use somebody else's technique, but then we tweak it a little bit, we add something to it or we change something, we still need to cite that person and say, hey, we're using this method, but with these amendments to it. By following these rules, you can guarantee that you will always cite correctly.